Hello and welcome to the show that investigates financial regulations with all the enthusiasm of a retiree sorting coupons at a Denny's. Today, we're diving into the 5 massive changes that former President Trump made to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or CFPB. Now I know what you're thinking. John, financial regulations on a Friday night? Couldn't we at least discuss something mildly entertaining like the mating habits of dung beetles? And you'd be right, that sounds more riveting. But buckle up, because we're going to unpack whether these Trump-era changes to the CFPB are good for consumers, like finding an uncashed check from your wealthy, long-lost uncle, or bad for consumers, like realizing that uncashed check was just a very convincing grocery list. This is important because the CFPB, in theory, is supposed to be on your side. They're meant to be the guys in the striped shirts making sure banks and payday lenders aren't pulling a fast one on you, the unsuspecting consumer. But like a lifeguard who's more interested in tanning than watching for drowning swimmers, the Trump administration made some. So, the first major change Trump made to the CFPB was like deciding to hire a fox as the head of henhouse security. He appointed Mick Mulvaney, a man who once called the CFPB a sick, sad joke, as its acting director. Now I'm not saying Mulvaney was unqualified, but his resume read like it was written on the back of a foreclosure notice. This is a man who, before joining the Trump administration, co-sponsored a bill to abolish the CFPB entirely. It's like asking Dracula to manage your blood bank. You might get some interesting policy decisions. Unsurprisingly, under Mulvaney's leadership, the CFPB became about as aggressive as a sloth in a coma. Enforcement actions plummeted, fines against financial institutions dried up faster than a martini in a room full of thirsty journalists, and the CFPB started to resemble a watchdog that had traded its bark for a chew toy and a belly rub. But wait, there's more! The leadership carousel at the CFPB didn't stop spinning with Mulvaney. Oh no, that would be far too stable and predictable. Trump then appointed Kathy Kraninger, a former budget official with about as much experience in consumer protection as I have in performing brain surgery. Look, I'm all for trying new things, but letting someone with no relevant experience run a major federal agency is like asking me to land a commercial airliner. It's not going to end well, and there will be a lot of screaming involved. This revolving door of leadership created chaos and uncertainty, which, let's be honest, is probably exactly what the Trump administration wanted. It's hard for an agency to protect consumers when it's constantly trying to figure out who's in charge and what their priorities are. It's like trying to play a game of chess where the rules keep changing, and your opponent keeps swapping out pieces for garden gnomes and rubber chickens. It's distracting, it's confusing, and frankly, it's just not fair. The impact of this leadership change was, to put it mildly, significant. Under Trump's appointees, the CFPB seemed less interested in protecting consumers and more interested in protecting the financial industry from, facing consequences for their actions. Imagine a referee at a football game who only calls penalties on one team, and you'll start to get the picture. This hands-off approach meant that banks and lenders faced fewer penalties for wrongdoing, while consumers were left more vulnerable to predatory practices. It's like watching a game of whack-a-mole where the moles are free to roam around and steal your picnic basket, while the person with the mallet is busy doing interpretive dance. It's nonsensical, it's infuriating, and it leaves you wondering who exactly is looking out for your best interests. Now, if appointing industry-friendly leaders wasn't enough to neuter the CFPB, the Trump administration decided to hit the agency where it really hurts: its wallet. They slashed the CFPB's budget with all the subtlety of a drunk pirate at a treasure auction. You see, the CFPB was originally designed to be funded independently through the Federal Reserve, which meant it wasn't beholden to the whims of Congress and its love of budgetary shenanigans. But that didn't sit well with Trump and his allies, who saw the CFPB's independent funding as a threat to their deregulatory agenda. It's like giving a watchdog a big, juicy steak, then snatching it away and replacing it with a bowl of dry kibble. Sure, the watchdog might still technically be there, but it's going to be a lot less motivated to chase after bad guys when it's running on fumes. The impact of these budget cuts was about as subtle as a sledgehammer to a piggy bank. The CFPB was forced to lay off staff, scale back investigations, and put important consumer protection initiatives on hold. It's like going to the doctor with a mysterious ailment, only to find out that the only doctor available is a guy in a lab coat who keeps asking if you want to buy essential oils and healing crystals. You'd probably question the quality of care, wouldn't you? And that's what happened at the CFPB. With fewer resources, the agency was simply unable to keep up with the sheer volume of complaints and potential violations. It's like trying to fight a forest fire with a squirt gun. You might be able to put out a few flames, but you're ultimately outmatched. The result? Well, let's just say that consumers were left feeling about as protected as a screen door on a submarine. With a weakened CFPB, predatory lenders and financial institutions were emboldened, like a group of raccoons who realized the motion-activated sprinkler is broken. They knew that the chances of facing serious consequences for their actions were about as likely as me winning a breakdancing competition. Spoiler alert, I have the flexibility of a rusty pipe cleaner. This created a climate where scams proliferated, hidden fees flourished, and consumers were left to navigate a financial system that felt increasingly rigged against them. It's enough to make you want to stuff your cash in a mattress and live off the grid, but then, knowing my luck, I'd probably just get robbed by a squirrel with a particularly strong nut-hoarding habit. Alright, buckle up because we're diving into the third big change Trump made to the CFPB, regulatory rollbacks. And it's about as fun as it sounds. Imagine you're at a buffet, right? You've piled your plate high with consumer protections, rules against predatory lending, arbitrary fees, that sort of thing. Then, Trump strolls in with a flimsy plastic spork and starts flicking those protections off your plate one by one. That's essentially what happened. Remember the payday lending rule, the one that was supposed to stop lenders from trapping people in cycles of debt? Yeah, that got weakened. The rule requiring financial advisors to act in their clients' best interests, not just their own, also softened. It's like the administration went through a checklist of things that protect consumers and decided, nah, let's get rid of them. And who benefits from all this deregulation? Well, not you. Unless you're the CEO of a payday lending company or a financial advisor who really enjoys misleading vulnerable people, then congratulations, your life just got a whole lot easier thanks to the Trump administration's commitment to, well, it's unclear what they were committed to besides making life harder for ordinary Americans. One of the most egregious examples of this regulatory rollback frenzy was the gutting of the CFPB's arbitration rule. Now, this rule was a real thorn in the side of big banks and credit card companies, and for a very good reason. You see, forced arbitration clauses, those sneaky little things buried in the fine print of contracts, were being used to prevent consumers from banding together and suing companies for wrongdoing. The CFPB, under Obama, recognized this as the bullshit it was and tried to level the playing field. They introduced a rule that would have allowed consumers to join class action lawsuits against financial institutions. It was a win for the little guy, a victory for common sense, and a very public black eye for companies who rely on ripping people off quietly. But did the Trump administration care about any of that? Did they prioritize the needs of ordinary Americans who were getting screwed over by unfair practices? Of course not. They sided with the corporations because apparently nothing says pro-business like making it harder for people to sue you when you do something wrong. The consequences of these regulatory rollbacks were about as predictable as a Trump tweet storm after someone insulted his intelligence. Consumer complaints skyrocketed, predatory lending practices were back with a vengeance, and the financial industry was, to the surprise of absolutely no one, celebrating their newfound freedom to exploit consumers without fear of consequences. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about making life easier for corporations. It was about fundamentally shifting the balance of power away from consumers and back towards the very institutions that had helped to cause the 2008 financial crisis. It was about dismantling a system that, while imperfect, was at least trying to protect ordinary Americans from being taken advantage of by powerful financial institutions. Alright, buckle up because we're diving into the fourth big change Trump made to the CFPB enforcement. You see, under Obama, the CFPB was kind of like that friend you have who, after one too many tequila shots, will absolutely fight anyone who looks at you funny. They were aggressive, maybe a little much at times, but they got results. But then Trump came in and was like, this whole protecting consumers thing, it's harshing my mellow man. Suddenly, the CFPB was all about collaboration and working with financial institutions. Think less Rottweiler, more golden retriever puppy wearing a little sweater vest. Now I'm all for a good sweater vest, but this softer approach had real consequences. Fines went down, enforcement actions dropped, and suddenly those predatory lenders, they were back in business, baby. It was like watching a nature documentary where the lion decides to start a vegan commune with the gazelles. Sure, it sounds nice in theory, but in practice someone's getting eaten alive. And spoiler alert, it's the consumer. Now you might be thinking, John, surely it can't be that bad. They're still fining these companies, right? And to that, I say bless your heart. Yes, technically, fines were still being issued, but they were about as intimidating as a parking ticket on a Hot Wheels car. We're talking pennies on the dollar compared to what companies faced under Obama. It was like watching a bully steal a kid's lunch money, get caught by the principal, and then get sentenced to writing "I will not steal lunch money" on the chalkboard 5 times. Not exactly the deterrent you're going for. But here's the real kicker. This shift in enforcement had a chilling effect on the entire industry. When companies saw that the CFPB was basically a toothless chihuahua in a bark-if-you-love-capitalism bandana, they knew they could get away with murder. And by murder, I mean charging exorbitant interest rates, slapping on hidden fees, and generally treating consumers like walking, talking ATMs. Because when the cops are on a permanent coffee break, it's open season for crime. This wasn't just about a few less fines being handed out, it was about sending a message. And that message, loud and clear, was that the Wild West of finance was back, and consumers were on their own. And now, for the fifth and perhaps most insidious change Trump made to the CFPB, the old switcheroo. Remember how the CFPB was created to protect consumers from the big bad financial industry? Well, under Trump it became increasingly clear that someone had swapped the mission statement with a pamphlet titled, 101 Ways to Deregulate Your Way to $1 Billion. It was like watching your beloved dog walker suddenly start taking your dog for play dates with a pack of wolves. You'd be forgiven for thinking, hang on, whose side are you on? The agency that was once feared and loathed by Wall Street was now being hailed as a champion of free markets and business-friendly policies, which, let's be honest, is usually code for, let's make it easier to screw over the little guy. Now, you can't talk about the CFPB's shift in focus without mentioning the good old-fashioned revolving door of Washington. See, under Trump, the CFPB became a landing pad for former industry lobbyists and executives, the very people the agency was designed to regulate. It was like hiring a fox to guard the henhouse, and then being surprised when you wake up to find feathers everywhere, and a very smug-looking fox wearing a bib. These industry insiders weren't interested in holding their former colleagues accountable. They were more concerned with making sure the champagne kept flowing at those swanky Washington cocktail parties, and guess who wasn't invited to those parties? You guessed it, the American consumer. So, what did this shift in focus actually mean for everyday Americans? Well, for starters, it meant fewer protections from predatory lending practices, weaker oversight of debt collectors, and less support for consumers facing financial hardship. Imagine going to a doctor who's more interested in selling you expensive, unnecessary treatments than actually diagnosing and treating your illness. That's what it felt like for consumers trying to navigate the financial system under Trump's CFPB. The agency that was supposed to be their advocate had become just another obstacle, another bureaucratic hurdle to overcome in their quest for basic financial fairness. So, there you have it, Trump's 5 big changes to the CFPB. We've seen how he reshaped the agency from top to bottom, from its leadership and budget to its enforcement practices and overall mission. We've explored how these changes led to a more industry-friendly environment, with fewer protections for consumers and less accountability for financial institutions. The question is, were these changes a good thing or a bad thing? Did they unleash the power of the free market and unleash economic growth, or did they simply tip the scales further in favor of the powerful and well-connected? What do you think about these changes? Are they good or bad for consumers? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more informative content.